The phone rang 17 times before it went to voicemail. Elara counted each one as blood pooled beneath her broken body at the bottom of the ravine, her wolf too weak to heal the silver poisoning spreading through her veins. Above her, through the shattered screen of her phone, she could see the call had connected, and she could hear everything. Her mate's low, rumbling laugh. The wet sound of lips meeting skin. And her sister Serena's breathless whisper, "She'll never know, Kale. She's too trusting to ever suspect us." The words cut deeper than the silver burning through her blood. 3 years. 3 years of cold silences and empty beds. 3 years of watching her mate look through her like she was made of glass, while she convinced herself that alphas simply showed love differently. That his distance was duty, not disgust. That eventually, he would see her. And all along, he'd been seeing her sister. Elara's fingers twitched against the cold earth, trying to reach the phone that had landed just inches from her shattered hand. The screen still glowed in the gathering darkness, the call still connected. She could hear them now, the rustle of sheets, Serena's theatrical moan, Kale's growled praise. "You're everything she isn't," he said, and his voice held a warmth Elara had never heard directed at her. Not once. Beautiful. Fierce. Worthy of standing beside me. Worthy. The word echoed in Elara's fading consciousness. She'd spent her whole life trying to be worthy. Worthy of her parents' love, though they'd always favored Serena's bold beauty over Elara's quiet grace. Worthy of the pack that had sneered at their Omega Luna, wondering why their Alpha King had bound himself to such a weak mate. Worthy of Kale, who had chosen her for political alliance and never let her forget it. Her hand moved to her stomach, where even now, despite the silver, despite the broken bones, despite everything, a tiny spark of life still flickered. She'd found out this morning. The pack healer had confirmed what Elara had suspected for weeks: she was pregnant. 8 weeks along. A miracle, the healer had called it, given how rarely Kale came to her bed. Elara had wept with joy, certain that this would be the turning point. A child. An heir. Surely this would thaw the ice in her mate's heart. She'd gone to gather moonflowers at dawn, slipping out before anyone could stop her. It was tradition, the oldest tradition, for a pregnant she-wolf to present her mate with moonflowers when announcing their pup. The delicate white blooms only grew in the deepest parts of Thornwood Forest, in the shadows where silver moonlight pooled like water. Dangerous territory. But Elara had been so desperate to do something right, something meaningful, something that might finally make Kale look at her with something other than cold indifference. Instead, she'd found rogues. They'd come out of nowhere, 4 of them, scarred and feral, with syringes full of liquid silver. She'd fought. Moon goddess help her, she'd fought with everything her Omega wolf possessed. But she was never trained for combat. She was trained for healing, for nurturing, for the gentle arts that made a good Luna. Not for war. The silver had burned like acid when they'd plunged the needle into her neck. She'd felt her wolf howl in agony, felt the connection between them weaken like a thread pulled too tight. Then they'd thrown her over the edge of the ravine, and she'd fallen, and fallen, and fallen. Until she'd hit the bottom. Now she lay broken among the rocks and roots, her blood seeping into the dark earth, and she could hear her mate making love to her sister through the cracked screen of her dying phone. "The baby," she whispered, though no one was there to hear. Her voice was barely a rasp, her throat raw from screaming on the way down. Please. Not the baby. But the silver was spreading. She could feel it in her veins like liquid fire, burning away everything that made her wolf. Without her wolf's healing, the fall alone would have killed a human woman. The silver was just making sure. Tears tracked through the blood on her face. She wasn't crying for herself, she'd stopped crying for herself years ago. She was crying for the tiny life inside her, the little heartbeat that had given her hope for the first time in 3 years. The baby would never know they'd existed. Would never take their first breath or first step. Would never be held, never be loved, never be anything at all. Because their father was too busy betting their aunt to answer the phone. A bitter laugh escaped Alara's broken lips. Of course it was Serena. Beautiful, ambitious Serena, who had always wanted everything Alara had. Who had raged when their parents announced Alara's betrothal to the Alpha King, even though Serena was the obvious choice, stronger, lovelier, more dominant in every way. She's an Omega, Serena had hissed at their mother. A weakness. What could the Alpha King possibly want with her? What indeed? Alara had never understood it herself. Kale had come to their pack seeking an alliance, and her father had offered Serena. But Kale's eyes had found Alara instead, lingering on her in a way that made her skin prickle. He'd asked for her specifically, and though his face had remained stone cold throughout the mating ceremony, Alara had foolishly believed there was something there. Some spark of fate. Some whisper of destiny. She knew better now. She'd been nothing but a political convenience. A treaty signed in flesh. And now that Serena had presumably offered Kale what Alara couldn't, fire, passion, ambition, her purpose was served. The phone finally went dark, the call disconnecting. In the silence, Alara could hear the forest around her. The whisper of wind through ancient trees. The distant cry of an owl. The soft, terrible sound of her own heartbeat slowing. I'm going to die here, she realized. In the dark. Alone. And no one will even come looking. Kale certainly wouldn't. He probably wouldn't notice her absence until morning, and by then, Serena would have spun some story. She ran away. She was always so fragile. So unsuitable. Better that she's gone. And the pack would believe it. They'd never wanted an Omega Luna anyway. Alara's eyes drifted closed. The pain was fading now, replaced by a cold numbness that spread from her extremities inward. It was almost peaceful. Almost welcome. She'd been fighting so hard for so long, fighting for acceptance, for love, for a place in a world that had never wanted her. Maybe it was time to stop fighting. Forgive me, she thought to the tiny life inside her. I wasn't strong enough. I wasn't enough. A shadow fell across her face. Alara's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, she thought she was hallucinating. A figure stood at the edge of the ravine, silhouetted against the dying light of the evening sky. Tall. Broad. And as she watched, impossibly, he began to climb down the sheer rock face as easily as walking downstairs. She tried to speak, to cry out, to warn him away. Rogues were still out there, and whoever this was, he would share her fate if they found him, but her voice was gone. He reached her in seconds. Knelt beside her in the blood-soaked earth. And when she saw his face, her breath caught in her ruined throat. Scars. Deep ones, running from his temple to his jaw, as if something with very large claws had tried to take his face off. His features were harsh, brutal almost, nothing like Kale's cold beauty. But it was his eyes that held her. They glowed not gold, like a wolf's eyes should, but silver. Pure, liquid silver, like moonlight given form. Little wolf, he said, and his voice was low and rough, like stones grinding together. You're a long way from home. Alara wanted to laugh. She had no home. She had nothing. She was dying alone in a ravine while her mate bedded her sister, and nothing about her life had ever been further from home. The stranger's silver eyes moved over her body, cataloging her injuries with clinical precision. She saw his jaw tighten when he noticed the injection site on her neck, the telltale burn of silver poisoning spreading across her skin. Who did this to you? She couldn't answer. Couldn't even shake her head. But something in her eyes must have told him enough, because his expression went terrifyingly cold. Rogues, he said flatly. Hunting on the border. Bold of them. He reached for her, and Alara flinched, or tried to. Her body wouldn't respond anymore. But his hands were surprisingly gentle as they slid beneath her broken form, lifting her from the cold earth as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. Pain exploded through her, and she might have screamed if she'd had the voice for it. He murmured something low and soothing, words she couldn't quite catch, and began to climb back up the ravine with her cradled against his chest. "The baby," she managed to whisper, using the last of her strength. "Please. Save the baby." The stranger looked down at her, and something flickered in those impossible silver eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or something deeper. "You're with child?" She couldn't answer. The darkness was coming now, rushing in from the edges of her vision. The last thing she saw was the stranger's scarred face above her, haloed by the first stars of the evening sky. The last thing she felt was his arms tightening around her, protective, possessive, certain. And the last thing she heard was his voice, rough as gravel and soft as a prayer. "The moon goddess isn't done with you yet, little wolf." Then the darkness took her, and Alara Gray knew nothing more. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 2. Alara woke to the sound of water. Not the harsh rush of a river or the pounding of rain, but something gentler, a soft, rhythmic dripping that echoed off stone walls like a lullaby. She lay still for a long moment, eyes closed, waiting for the pain to remind her she was dying. It never came. Her eyes flew open, and she found herself staring at a ceiling of rough-hewn rock, lit by the warm glow of dozens of candles. She was lying on something soft. A bed, she realized, with thick furs piled beneath her and a woven blanket tucked around her body. The air smelled of herbs and wood smoke and something else, something wild and ancient that she couldn't name. "I'm alive." The thought hit her with the force of a physical blow. She was alive. She shouldn't be, the fall alone should have killed her, and the silver poisoning should have finished what the fall started. But her body felt whole. Strong, even. Stronger than it had felt in months. Years. Alara sat up slowly, waiting for dizziness or nausea or any of the symptoms that should have accompanied her injuries. Instead, she felt almost clear. Almost clean. As if someone had reached inside her and scrubbed away years of accumulated exhaustion. Her hand went to her stomach, trembling. "The baby's fine." The voice came from the shadows near the doorway, and Alara's head snapped toward it. A woman emerged into the candlelight. Older, perhaps 50, with iron-gray hair braided down her back and eyes that held the knowing look of a healer. She wore simple clothes, practical and worn, and carried a wooden tray with a steaming cup and a small bowl of something that smelled like broth. "You've been asleep for 3 days, the woman continued, setting the tray on a table beside the bed. "We weren't sure you'd wake at all, but the Alpha said you would. Said the moon goddess had plans for you." She snorted softly. "He's dramatic like that." Alara's hand was still pressed to her stomach, her heart pounding. "The baby. You're certain?" "I'm certain." The healer's expression softened slightly. "Strong heartbeat. Healthy development. Whatever that silver did to you, your child seems to have weathered it." She paused, and something flickered in her eyes, something Alara couldn't quite read. "Though there have been some changes." "Changes?" The healer shook her head. "That's for the Alpha to explain. I'm just here to make sure you eat something and don't try to get up before your body's ready." She pushed the cup toward Alara. "Drink. It'll help." Alara took the cup automatically, but she didn't drink. Her mind was racing, trying to piece together the fragments of memory from the ravine. The rogues. The fall. The phone call that had shattered what was left of her heart. And then. The stranger with silver eyes. "Where am I?" she asked. "Who brought me here?" "You're in the sanctuary," the healer said. "As for who brought you, well, that's a longer story than I'm qualified to tell." She nodded toward the doorway. "He's been waiting for you to wake. Hasn't left the corridor in 3 days, except to deal with the rogues who attacked you." Her lips curved in grim satisfaction. "They won't be attacking anyone else." Something cold settled in Alara's chest. "He killed them?" They got what they deserved. The healer's voice held no sympathy. Injecting a pregnant woman with liquid silver and throwing her off a cliff? There's no justice harsh enough for that kind of evil. She studied Alara's face. You should know, when they stripped the bodies, they found something. Hidden insignias beneath their cloaks. Blackwood pack. The words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. That's impossible. The Blackwood rogues were exiled years ago. They hate the pack. They would never. These weren't exiled rogues, the healer said quietly. These were trained soldiers. Pack soldiers, wearing rogue disguises. She met Alara's eyes, and there was pity there now, mixed with something harder. Someone inside Blackwood sent them to kill you, Luna. This wasn't a random attack. Alara's hands began to shake. The cup trembled in her grip, tea sloshing over the rim. I'll send the Alpha in, the healer said, taking the cup gently from Alara's fingers. He'll explain everything. But first, she hesitated. There's something you should see. She pulled a small hand mirror from her apron pocket and held it out. Alara took it automatically, raising it to her face, expecting to see bruises, cuts, the evidence of her near death. Instead, she saw clear skin. No wounds. No scars. She looked healthier than she had in years, her cheeks fuller, her eyes brighter. But then her gaze dropped to her chest, where the collar of her simple shift had slipped to one side, and her breath caught. A scar. A silver crescent moon, etched into the skin directly over her heart. It gleamed faintly in the candlelight, almost seeming to glow, and when Alara pressed her fingers to it, she felt warmth pulse beneath the surface. What? The silver changed you, the healer said softly. It nearly killed you, but something happened when the Alpha carried you here. Something none of us have seen before. She paused. You're Wolf. Can you feel her? Alara closed her eyes, reaching inward for the familiar presence of her wolf. She'd always been there, a quiet companion in the back of Alara's mind, gentle, nurturing, perfectly suited to an Omega. But now her wolf surged forward with a power that made Alara gasp. She was still there, still Alara's wolf, but she was more. Larger. Stronger. The quiet Omega presence had been replaced by something fiercer, something that prowled behind Alara's eyes with new confidence. The wolf wanted to run, to hunt, to fight, feelings Alara had never experienced before. The silver almost destroyed your wolf, the healer said, watching Alara's face. But instead, it seems to have transformed her. We've never seen anything like it. She shook her head slowly. The Alpha will explain more. I've said too much already. She gathered her things and moved toward the door, but paused at the threshold. For what it's worth, she said, I'm glad you survived. This world needs more people who'd use their dying breath to beg for their child's life instead of their own. Then she was gone, and Alara was alone with the flickering candles and the impossible mark over her heart. She sat there for a long moment, trying to process everything she'd learned. Her baby was safe. She was healed. But someone had tried to kill her, someone from her own pack. And her wolf, her gentle Omega wolf, was now something else entirely. Nothing made sense anymore. A soft knock sounded at the doorway, and Alara looked up to find the stranger from the ravine standing at the threshold. In the dim light of the underground chamber, she could see him more clearly than she had in the fading evening. He was tall, taller than Kale, broader through the shoulders, and he moved with the controlled power of a predator. The scars she remembered marred the left side of his face, twisting from his temple to his jaw, and his silver eyes caught the candlelight like mirrors. He wasn't handsome. Not in the polished, perfect way Kale was handsome. But there was something about him that drew the eye and held it. Something raw and real and utterly without pretense. You're awake, he said, and his voice was just as she remembered, low and rough, like stones in a riverbed. You saved my life. I did. He stepped into the room but came no closer, maintaining a careful distance. You were dead when I found you. Your heart had stopped. But your wolf, he shook his head. Your wolf refused to let go. Ilara's hand went to the crescent scar over her heart. The healer said the silver changed me. It should have killed you. Liquid silver, injected directly into the bloodstream, there's no surviving that. Not for an Omega. Not for anyone. His silver eyes studied her face. But you did. And in doing so, you became something new. Something new, she repeated. What does that mean? It means your wolf is no longer purely Omega. The silver burned away whatever limitations your rank imposed on you. What's left is, he paused, seeming to search for the right word. Pure. Unclassified. Something between Omega and Alpha that I've never seen before. Ilara thought of the way her wolf had surged when she reached for her, the fierce power that now prowled behind her eyes. Is that why I feel so different? Partly. The stranger moved to a chair near the bed and sat, his movements careful, almost hesitant. As if he was afraid of frightening her. Your wolf was always strong, Ilara. She was just suppressed. Diminished. Made small by a world that told you Omegas were meant to be small. Ilara flinched at her name on his lips. How do you know who I am? I know many things about the Blackwood Pack. His voice held an edge now, something dark and bitter. I know their Alpha King. I know his weaknesses, his secrets, his sins. I've spent a decade gathering that knowledge. He leaned forward, and his silver eyes burned into hers. I know, for instance, that Kale murdered his own father to take the throne. And that before he did, he tried to murder his brother, too. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Ilara's mind worked slowly, piecing together what she knew. Kale had become Alpha King 10 years ago, after his father died in a pack war. His older brother had died in the same battle, killed by enemy wolves while defending the pack. It was a tragedy that had shaped Kale, made him hard and cold and ruthless. At least, that was the story. You're saying Kale killed his father, she said slowly. And his brother. His father, yes. His brother, the stranger's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. His brother proved harder to kill. Understanding crashed over Ilara like a wave of ice water. You, she whispered. You're Cain. He inclined his head. Firstborn son of the late Alpha King. Rightful ruler of the Blackwood Pack. And, according to everyone who matters, dead for the past 10 years. Ilara couldn't breathe. She was sitting in front of a ghost. A legend. Cain Blackwood had been the golden prince of the pack, beloved by all, destined for greatness. His death had been mourned for years. Songs were still sung about his sacrifice. And he was sitting in front of her, scarred and alive and watching her with those impossible silver eyes. Kale tried to have me assassinated the night before the battle, Cain said, his voice flat and cold. His men caught me alone, drugged my food, and dragged me into the forest. They were supposed to make it look like enemy wolves killed me. But I woke up before they could finish the job. He touched the scars on his face. I didn't escape unharmed. But I escaped. Why didn't you come back? Ilara asked. If you survived, why didn't you tell anyone what Kale did? Who would have believed me? Cain's voice was bitter. I woke up 3 weeks later in a healer's hut, half my face torn off, with no proof and no witnesses. By then, the battle was over. My father was dead. And Kale was already on the throne, beloved by a pack that thought he'd avenged his fallen brother. He shook his head. I tried, at first. Sent messages. Reached out to those I thought I could trust. But Kale had already laid the groundwork. Anyone who listened to me died. Accidents. Disappearances. After I lost the fourth ally, I realized I needed a different approach. So you've been hiding, Alara said. For 10 years. Gathering evidence. Building an army. Cain gestured around them at the stone walls of the sanctuary. This place exists outside any pack territory. It's where I bring the outcasts, the exiles, the betrayed. Wolves who have been thrown away by their packs for being too weak, too different, too inconvenient. I give them a home. A purpose. His eyes met hers. A chance for revenge. Alara thought of the healer with her knowing eyes. Thought of the way Cain had spoken of omegas, of strength being suppressed rather than absent. You take in omegas. Omegas. Scarred wolves. Those whose mates rejected them. Those who dared to speak against their alphas. Cain's voice softened. The ones the world calls worthless. I call them my pack. Something shifted in Alara's chest, a crack in the wall she'd built around her heart. For so long, she believed her omega status made her lesser. Weaker. Unworthy of her mate's love. But here was an alpha, a true alpha, with power radiating from him like heat from a fire, telling her that everything she'd believed was a lie. Why did you save me? She asked. You didn't know who I was. No, Cain agreed. But I knew you were dying. I knew you were pregnant. And I knew, he paused, something flickering in his expression. I knew you deserved a chance to live. The simple words hit her harder than they should have. You deserved a chance to live. When was the last time anyone had thought she deserved anything? My baby, she said, changing the subject before she could embarrass herself with tears. The healer said there were changes. What did she mean? Cain's expression shifted, becoming guarded. The silver that poisoned you, it didn't just change your wolf. It touched your child as well. During the 3 days you slept, our healers monitored the pregnancy closely. The baby is healthy, growing normally. But there's something different about them. Fear gripped Alara's heart. Different how? Their aura, Cain said slowly. Every wolf has one. It's how we sense rank, power, threat level. Your child's aura is, he shook his head. It's like nothing I've ever felt. Pure power, unfiltered and immense. As if the silver that almost killed you gave your child something instead of taking it away. Alara's hand pressed against her stomach. Are they dangerous? Every child born of wolves is dangerous. Cain's voice was gentle despite the words. But no, I don't think your child will be a threat to you or anyone who loves them. They will simply be extraordinary. In ways we can't predict yet. Extraordinary. Her child, conceived in coldness and indifference, nearly killed before they could draw breath, was going to be extraordinary. The irony wasn't lost on her. I need to go back, Alara said suddenly. The decision crystallized in her mind with startling clarity. Cale needs to know what he's done. What he tried to do. He needs to die. Cain finished. I agree. But not yet. Why not? I have proof now. The rogues who attacked me were Blackwood soldiers. You can testify that Cale tried to kill you. We can. We can do nothing until we know who else is involved. Cain's voice cut through her rising excitement like a blade. Think, Alara. Those soldiers didn't act alone. Someone commanded them. Someone ordered a squad of trained fighters to ambush and murder their own Luna. And that someone, his jaw tightened. That someone has been planning this for a long time. The truth of it settled over her like a shroud. Cale might have wanted her dead, but he wouldn't have been so clumsy about it. He was cold and distant, but he wasn't stupid. A dead Luna would raise questions. Demand investigations. Whoever had ordered this attack had been willing to take that risk. Which meant they had a plan to explain her death. Serena, Alara whispered, and the name tasted like ash on her tongue. My sister. She's been, the memory of that phone call flooded back, Serena's breathless voice, Kale's rumbling laugh. She'll never know. She's too trusting to ever suspect us. She's been sleeping with Kale. For at least a year, according to my sources, Kane confirmed. She's been positioning herself to take your place since your mating. But there's more. He hesitated, and Alara saw something like pity in his expression. My healers examined you thoroughly when you arrived. They found traces of wolfsbane in your system. Very small amounts, delivered consistently over a long period. Alara's blood ran cold. Wolfsbane? In doses too small to kill. Just enough to weaken. To suppress. To make an Omega's wolf even smaller than she already was. Kane's voice was carefully controlled, but Alara could hear the rage beneath it. Someone has been slowly poisoning you for months. Weakening your wolf, making you vulnerable. The silver injection might have finished the job, but the groundwork was laid long before those rogues found you in the forest. The room tilted around Alara. She thought of the tea Serena always made for her, sweetened with honey to hide any bitter taste. The way Serena was always there at breakfast, at lunch, at dinner, always so attentive, always so caring. Too trusting to ever suspect us. Not just too trusting to suspect an affair. Too trusting to suspect poison. She tried to kill me, Alara said, and her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Hollow. Distant. My own sister has been trying to kill me. And she'll try again, if you go back now. Kane leaned forward, his silver eyes intense. You're not ready, Alara. Your wolf is strong, but you don't know how to use her yet. And your enemies have been planning this for far longer than you've known you were in danger. If you go back now, you'll walk right into their trap. So what am I supposed to do? The anger she'd been suppressing finally broke through, raw and hot. Hide here while they steal my life? While Serena takes my place at Kale's side? While my child grows up in exile? No. Kane rose from his chair, and suddenly he seemed to fill the entire room. You stay here. You train. You learn to use the power the silver gave you. And when you're ready, when you're strong enough to face them all and win, then you go back. Not as the weak little Omega they tried to kill. But as something they never expected. He held out his hand to her, and in his silver eyes, she saw a promise. A future she'd never imagined. A chance to become someone new. Stay with me, Kane said. Let me help you become what you were always meant to be. And when the time comes, we'll take back everything they stole from both of us. Alara looked at his scarred face, his offered hand, the conviction burning in his impossible eyes. She thought of everything she'd lost, her trust, her marriage, her belief in her own worth. And she thought of everything she'd found. A child growing in her belly, a wolf prowling strong behind her eyes, and a man who looked at her like she was worth saving. She took his hand. And in that moment, Alara Gray, the quiet Omega Luna who had never been enough, began to die. In her place, something new started to rise. Chapter 3. They buried an empty coffin beneath a cloudless sky. Alara watched from the shadows of the ancient oaks at the forest's edge, close enough to see the faces of the mourners but far enough that her scent wouldn't carry on the wind. Kane stood beside her, silent and watchful, his scarred face unreadable as the ceremony unfolded below. The Blackwood pack had spared no expense for their Luna's funeral. White flowers cascaded from every surface. Lilies for purity, moonflowers for devotion, roses for love that had never existed. The coffin itself was carved from sacred ash wood, inlaid with silver filigree that caught the afternoon light. A portrait of Alara sat atop the closed lid, painted from her mating ceremony 3 years ago, showing a young woman with hopeful eyes and a trembling smile. She barely recognized herself. They found your torn clothing at the bottom of the ravine, Kane murmured, his voice barely audible. Along with enough blood to convince them no one could have survived. The official story is that rogues killed you, an unprovoked attack on the beloved Luna of Blackwood. Beloved. The word tasted bitter even in Alara's mind. She had never been beloved. She had been tolerated at best, dismissed at worst. But now, in death, they were rewriting her story. Below, the gathered wolves arranged themselves in careful hierarchy. The allied pack alphas stood in the front row. Representatives from Silver Creek, Moonhaven, and the Northern Territories, all wearing expressions of solemn respect. Behind them came the Blackwood elite, the council members and their families, dressed in traditional mourning black. And at the very front, standing before the empty coffin like actors on a stage, were Kale and Serena. Elara's nails dug into the bark of the tree she leaned against. Kale wore grief like a perfectly tailored suit. His handsome face was set in lines of sorrow, his golden eyes downcast, his broad shoulders bowed as if under an unbearable weight. He spoke in a voice that carried across the gathered crowd, rich with emotion, trembling with carefully manufactured pain. "My mate was taken from me too soon," he said, and the words were so sincere that even Elara might have believed them if she hadn't heard him laughing in Serena's arms while she lay dying. Elara was gentle. Kind. Everything a Luna should be. The rogues who murdered her have been hunted and destroyed, but no amount of vengeance can fill the void she left behind. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. Sympathetic. Believing. They found the rogues? Elara whispered to Kane. They found bodies wearing rogue disguises, Kane replied. Convenient scapegoats, killed before they could reveal who really sent them. The Blackwood insignias they carried have been conveniently destroyed. Of course. Kale was nothing if not thorough. Serena stood at Kale's side, her position just slightly behind him, appropriate for a grieving sister-in-law, inappropriate for what she really was. She wore black silk that clung to her curves, her golden hair swept up beneath a delicate veil, her beautiful face arranged in an expression of devastating loss. But her eyes were dry. And when she thought no one was looking, Elara caught the slight curve of satisfaction at the corner of her sister's painted lips. You're enjoying this, Elara realized. You're standing at my funeral, wearing my place like a stolen crown, and you're enjoying every second. Her wolf surged against its restraints, howling for blood. Easy, Kane murmured. His hand found her elbow, steadying her. Not yet. Elara forced herself to breathe, to push her wolf back down, to watch. This was why she'd come, not for revenge, not yet, but for knowledge. She needed to see who her enemies really were. And who, if anyone, had truly cared for her. The answer to both questions was becoming painfully clear. Her mother stood in the second row, positioned among the honored guests. Lady Vera Gray had always been a beautiful woman, elegant and poised, and she played the role of grieving mother with practiced skill. She dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. She leaned against her husband for support. She accepted condolences with graceful nods and soft murmurs of thanks. But beneath her black mourning veil, Elara could see the color of her dress. Red. A deep, wine-dark red that showed in flashes when the fabric shifted. The color of celebration, hidden beneath the costume of grief. She's glad I'm dead. The realization should have hurt more than it did. Perhaps some part of Elara had always known. She had never been the daughter her mother wanted, too quiet, too gentle, too Omega. Serena had always been the favorite, the golden child, the one who would bring glory to the family name. Elara had been the spare, married off for political advantage, useful only for the alliance she represented. And now that she was gone, there was no one standing between Serena and everything their mother had ever wanted for her. Your father seems more affected, Kane observed quietly. Elara's eyes found her father in the crowd. Lord Marcus Gray stood rigid beside his wife, his weathered face pale and drawn. Unlike his wife, he wore no hidden colors. Unlike his wife, his eyes glistened with what appeared to be genuine tears. But he didn't speak. Didn't protest when Serena took her place at Kale's side. Didn't do anything except stand there, silent and complicit, as he always had. He knew, Elara thought. Maybe not about the murder, but about the affair. About Serena's ambitions. And he did nothing. She looked away from her parents, searching the crowd for other faces. The council members wore appropriate expressions of solemnity, but she could see the calculation behind their eyes, already assessing what the Luna's death meant for pack politics, already positioning themselves for whatever came next. The allied alphas looked respectfully somber, but their attention kept drifting to Kale, measuring him, evaluating how this loss might affect their alliances. No one truly mourned her. She had been Luna for 3 years, and not a single member of the pack's elite seemed genuinely affected by her death. Then her eyes found the back of the gathering, where the lower-ranked wolves stood in clusters, and her heart clenched. Mira was there. Her handmaiden, her only real friend in the palace, stood at the very edge of the crowd with tears streaming openly down her face. She made no effort to hide her grief, no attempt to compose herself into appropriate solemnity. She simply wept, her small body shaking with sobs that she tried to muffle with her hands. Beside Mira stood old Helena, the pack's former healer who had retired years ago but still made salves for aching joints and teas for troubled sleep. Helena had always been kind to Alara, always treated her with the respect due a Luna rather than the dismissal given an Omega. Now the elderly woman's face was gray with grief, her gnarled hands clutching a bundle of dried herbs. Offerings for the dead, in the old tradition. And behind them both, huddled together like frightened rabbits, were the children. Alara's breath caught in her throat. The orphaned pups. 6 of them, ranging from 4 years old to 12, children who had lost their parents to various tragedies and been left in the pack's care. The pack provided for them, food, shelter, basic education, but no one had time to truly care for them. No one except Alara, who had spent countless hours in the orphan house, reading stories and bandaging scraped knees and simply being present in the way no one else bothered to be. They stood in a ragged line, wearing their best clothes, patched and worn but clean, and every single one of them was crying. Little Tomas, only 4, clutched a tattered blanket that Alara had given him when nightmares kept him awake. Beside him, 8-year-old Lily held a paper flower she must have made herself, ready to place on the coffin. And 12-year-old Marcus, named for a father he'd never known, stood at the end of the line with his jaw clenched and his fists balled, trying so hard to be strong while tears tracked silently down his cheeks. They're the only ones who really loved me, Alara realized. The forgotten ones. The overlooked. The ones who had nothing to offer me except their hearts. Something cracked open in her chest, grief and rage and love all tangled together. And her wolf, that newly fierce presence behind her eyes, threw back her head and howled. The sound tore from Alara's throat before she could stop it. Not a quiet Omega's whimper, not the soft cry of a submissive wolf. This was something else entirely, a howl of pure, devastating power that rolled across the funeral gathering like thunder. Every wolf in attendance froze. Down, Cain hissed, pulling her behind the massive oak trunk. His body pressed against hers, shielding her, as pandemonium erupted below. Alara could hear the shouts, the confused cries, the sound of wolves shifting to investigate. Her howl had echoed off the mountains, impossible to pinpoint but impossible to ignore. It had sounded like no Omega. It had sounded like no Alpha either. It had sounded like something ancient and wild, something that hadn't walked these lands in centuries. What the hell was that? Someone bellowed, one of the council members, Alara thought. A wolf in the forest, another voice answered. Must be a rogue. That was no rogue. This voice was quieter, colder, and Alara recognized it with a jolt of visceral hatred. Kale. That was something else. Should we search the woods? A long pause. Then, no. Continue the ceremony. Whoever or whatever made that sound is long gone. But Alara could hear the edge of uncertainty in Kale's voice. He knew that howl had been unnatural. He just didn't know what it meant. Cain kept her pinned against the tree until the commotion died down and the ceremony resumed. Even then, he didn't release her immediately. His silver eyes searched her face, and she saw something there she couldn't quite identify. Surprise, yes, but also something that might have been respect. That was incredibly stupid, he said quietly. And incredibly impressive. I've never heard a howl like that. I couldn't stop it. Elara's voice was hoarse, her throat raw. When I saw the children, they were the only ones who. I know. His voice softened slightly. I saw. Below, the ceremony continued. Kale spoke more empty words. Serena dabbed at dry eyes. The coffin was lowered into the ground, and Elara watched as dirt fell on the box that was supposed to hold her body. I died down there, she thought. The Elara they knew, the quiet Omega Luna who tried so hard to be worthy, she's really dead. And whatever I am now, whatever I'm becoming, is something they've never seen before. We should go, Kane murmured. Before their scouts get too close. Elara nodded but didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on Kale's face as he played the grieving widower, and she felt something twist in her chest. Not love, she didn't think she'd ever really loved him. But something. The ghost of what she'd hoped they might become, the dream of a mate bond that was warm instead of cold. That ghost was dying now, killed by the sight of Serena's hand resting possessively on Kale's arm. Look, she whispered. She's already claiming him. Kane followed her gaze. She's been claiming him for a year. This just makes it public. He'll announce her as his new mate soon. Within the mourning period, according to my sources. She's already pregnant with his child. Elara's hand went to her own stomach, where her baby grew in secret. A child of the same father, conceived in coldness while its sibling was conceived in betrayal. The thought made her sick. We need to go, Kane said again, more urgently this time. Elara took one last look at her own funeral, at the coffin in the ground, the empty flowers, the false grief. Then she turned and followed Kane into the shadows of the forest, leaving the last pieces of her old life behind. They traveled in silence for nearly an hour before reaching the entrance to the sanctuary. It was hidden cleverly, disguised as a natural rock formation that required knowing exactly which stones to press in which order. Kane led the way through winding tunnels lit by phosphorescent moss until they emerged into a vast underground cavern. The sanctuary was larger than Elara had realized during her recovery. What she'd seen from her sickbed was only a small healing chamber. The main cavern was the size of a great hall, with natural stone columns reaching toward a ceiling lost in shadow. Wolves moved through the space in small groups, some training with weapons in a cleared area, others gathered around cooking fires, still others huddled over books and maps. It was a community, Elara realized. A hidden pack, built from the broken pieces of a dozen others. How many? She asked. 347, Kane replied. More arriving every month. Word spreads among the outcasts. Those who have nowhere else to go eventually find their way here. 300 wolves. It wasn't enough to challenge Blackwood directly, Kale's pack numbered in the thousands, but it was far more than Elara had expected. Kane led her to a private chamber off the main cavern, smaller and quieter, with a rough-hewn table covered in papers and maps. He gestured for her to sit, and she did, grateful to be off her feet. The journey from Blackwood had been harder than she'd anticipated. Her new wolf might be stronger, but her body was still recovering, still adjusting. You saw what you needed to see, Kane said, settling into the chair across from her. Now you understand what you're dealing with. I understand that almost no one cared whether I lived or died. Elara's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. The grief was there, buried deep, but she didn't have time for it now. I understand that my family helped my sister steal my mate. I understand that Kale murdered my coffin into the ground with relief in his heart. And the children who wept for you? The handmaiden? The healer? Collateral damage. The words tasted like poison. If Serena and Kale knew how much they meant to me, they'd use them. Hurt them to hurt me. Then we need to make sure they never get the chance. Kane leaned forward, his silver eyes intense. I've been building this army for 10 years, Elara. Gathering evidence. Positioning allies. Waiting for the right moment to strike. And I believe that moment is coming. The blood moon ceremony, Alara said. She remembered her studies, the ancient ritual that happened once every decade, when the Alpha reaffirmed his bond with the pack and the moon goddess judged his worthiness to rule. In 3 months. Kane nodded. Every allied pack will send representatives. Every council member will be present. It's the one time when all of Blackwood's power structures are gathered in one place, and it's the one time when an accusation of unworthiness could actually succeed. You want to expose him during the ceremony. I want to destroy him during the ceremony. Kane's voice dropped, soft and deadly. But I can't do it alone. The blood moon ritual requires the Alpha to stand with his Luna in the sacred chamber. The pack magic recognizes her presence. Without it, the ritual can't be completed. And more importantly, the sacred chamber has wards that prevent any outsider from entering. Alara understood suddenly. But I'm not an outsider. You're still Kale's mate. The bond is weakened, but it hasn't broken, not officially. In the eyes of pack magic, you're still Luna of Blackwood. You can enter the sacred chamber when no one else can. And do what? Deliver evidence of Kale's crimes directly to the allied alphas. Present testimony that cannot be ignored or suppressed. Force a judgment during the one ceremony where the moon goddess's verdict is considered absolute. Kane's scarred face was fierce with determination. I've spent a decade gathering proof of his corruption. But proof means nothing if it can be buried, dismissed, or explained away. The blood moon ceremony is the one time when the truth cannot be hidden. Alara's mind raced. It was a good plan. Audacious, dangerous, but potentially devastating. If they could expose Kale's crimes during the sacred ceremony, in front of every allied pack and under the judgment of the moon goddess herself, there would be no recovery. No spin. No political maneuvering. He would fall, and he would fall completely. But there were risks. Enormous risks. If I'm caught. You won't be. We'll plan every detail. By the time the ceremony arrives, you'll be prepared for anything. Alara looked at Kane across the table, this scarred ghost of a man who had survived his brother's betrayal and spent a decade planning revenge. His silver eyes burned with an intensity that made something flutter in her chest, something she quickly suppressed. Why me? She asked. You could have found another way. Could have found someone else. There is no one else. Kane's voice softened slightly. You're the only one who can enter that chamber. You're the only one with a legitimate claim to stand at his side. And you're the only one who has a personal stake in his destruction that I know I can trust. He paused. You want him to pay for what he did to you. For your child. For those orphaned pups who wept at your funeral while your own mother wore red beneath her veil. The word struck home. Alara thought of little Tomas and his tattered blanket. Thought of Myra's genuine tears. Thought of the empty coffin and the empty marriage and the empty life she'd led for 3 years. I'll do it, she said. But I have a condition. Kane's eyebrow rose. Name it. Kale is yours. I understand that. He betrayed you first, and he's stolen your throne. You have the right to bring him down. Alara leaned forward, and she felt her wolf rising behind her eyes, lending weight to her words. But Serena is mine. Something flickered in Kane's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or appreciation. Your sister. My sister who poisoned me for months. Who stole my mate. Who stood at my funeral wearing satisfaction like a crown while she carried the child that was supposed to replace mine. Alara's voice was steady, but her wolf was snarling. When Kale falls, I want to be the one who destroys her. I want to look in her eyes when she realizes the weak little Omega she tried to kill is the one who ended everything she thought she'd won. A long silence stretched between them. Kane studied her face, his silver eyes searching, measuring, assessing. You've changed, he said finally. 3 days ago, you were dying in a ravine, begging for your baby's life. Now you're making demands and planning your sister's destruction. 3 days ago, I still believed people were good. That my family loved me. That my mate might someday care. Elara met his gaze without flinching. You said it yourself, the silver burned away my limitations. Maybe it burned away my illusions, too. Another pause. Then Kane smiled, a real smile, not the grim twist she'd seen before. It transformed his scarred face, made him look younger, made his silver eyes gleam with something that might have been admiration. Serena is yours, he agreed. When the time comes, I'll make sure of it. Elara nodded, satisfied. But as she rose to leave, Kane's hand caught her wrist. His touch was warm, his grip careful, and when she looked back, his expression had shifted to something more serious. One more thing, he said. The mate bond. Elara's breath caught. She'd felt it since she woke, the thread that connected her to Kale, once cold but constant, now fraying at the edges. Growing weaker with every hour. It's breaking, she said. I thought maybe the silver. The silver might have accelerated it, but mate bonds don't break just because of poison. Kane's voice was careful, measured. They break when the connection between wolves is severed. When one mate betrays the other so completely that the bond can no longer sustain itself. He paused. Or when one mate begins to form a new connection. The words hung in the air between them. Elara was suddenly very aware of his hand on her wrist, the warmth of his skin, the intensity of his silver gaze. I don't, she started. I'm not saying anything, Kane said quietly. I'm just telling you what I've observed. The bond is weakening. And when it breaks completely, you'll feel it. Be prepared. He released her wrist and stepped back, the moment breaking like a soap bubble. We'll start your training tomorrow, he said, his voice businesslike again. Combat, strategy, and how to use your new wolf's abilities. You have 3 months to become someone Kale and Serena never imagined you could be. Elara nodded and left the chamber, her mind spinning with everything she'd learned. The plan. The ceremony. The mate bond that was slowly dying inside her. And the way her heart had raced when Kane touched her wrist. She pressed her hand to her stomach, where her child grew in secret, and made herself a promise. Whatever was happening, whatever she was feeling, whatever she was becoming, she would not let it distract her from what mattered. Kale would fall. Serena would burn. And Elara would rise from the ashes of her own funeral to make them pay for every single thing they'd done. Chapter 4. The blade whistled past Elara's ear, close enough to slice a strand of hair from her head. She didn't flinch. 3 months ago, she would have screamed and cowered. Now she simply pivoted, letting her body flow like water around the attack, and drove her elbow into her opponent's ribs with enough force to crack bone. Zara, one of Kane's best fighters, a scarred warrior who had escaped an abusive alpha in the Northern Territories, grunted and staggered back. But she was smiling, her dark eyes bright with approval. Better, she said, rubbing her side. Much better. You're finally stopping thinking and starting to feel. Elara lowered her training blade, breathing hard. Sweat plastered her hair to her forehead, and every muscle in her body ached with the pleasant exhaustion of hard work. Her belly had grown round over the past months, 6 months pregnant now, unmistakably showing, but it hadn't slowed her down the way everyone expected. If anything, her pregnancy seemed to fuel her, giving her strength and speed that defied explanation. Again, she asked. Zara shook her head. You've been at this for 4 hours. Even Silver Lunas need rest. Silver Luna. The name had spread through the sanctuary like wildfire after old Helena, the healer Elara had thought she'd left behind at Blackwood, but who had actually fled to Kane's sanctuary years ago, had examined her and gone pale as milk. Once in a millennium, Helena had whispered, her gnarled hands trembling against Elara's silver-scarred chest. I've read about them in the ancient texts, but I never thought I'd see one. A wolf who survives what should have been fatal, transformed by the very poison meant to kill her. The moon goddess's chosen warrior. Elara hadn't felt like a chosen warrior then. She'd felt like a broken woman trying to piece herself back together. But 3 months of training had changed that. 3 months of learning to fight, to strategize, to command. 3 months of discovering powers she'd never known she possessed. She could sense lies now. It had started small, a prickle at the back of her neck when someone spoke falsely, a bitter taste on her tongue when deception hung in the air. But it had grown stronger, more refined, until she could read the truth in someone's words as easily as reading a book. She could command lesser wolves with her voice. Not control them. She would never take away someone's free will, but when she spoke with authority, when she let her wolf rise behind her words, other wolves listened. Obeyed. Even dominant wolves found themselves inclining their heads in deference, responding to something primal and ancient in her tone. And her touch. Moon goddess, her touch. She could heal with it, laying her hands on a wound and feeling the silver mark over her heart pulse with warmth as flesh knitted back together. She had discovered this accidentally, when a young Omega in the sanctuary had fallen during training and gashed her leg to the bone. Elara had reached out instinctively, wanting to help, and the wound had simply closed beneath her palms. But she could burn, too. She'd learned that when a rogue wolf had breached the sanctuary's defenses last month, snarling and snapping and aiming straight for Elara's pregnant belly. She'd grabbed his wrist to push him away, and her touch had seared his skin like a brand. He'd screamed and collapsed, and when Cain's warriors had subdued him, the shape of Elara's handprint had been burned permanently into his flesh. Healing or harm, Helena had explained later. The Silver Luna's touch responds to intent. Those who mean her well receive healing. Those who mean her harm receive judgment. Judgment. It was a heavy word for a woman who had spent her whole life trying to be gentle. Elara wiped the sweat from her face and made her way to the natural spring at the edge of the training cavern. The water was cool and clean, fed by underground rivers that had flowed through these caves for thousands of years. She cupped her hands and drank deeply, feeling her body begin to recover. "You're getting stronger." She didn't turn at the sound of Cain's voice. She'd learned to sense his presence weeks ago, a particular warmth at the edge of her awareness, a pull that had nothing to do with the fading mate bond that still technically connected her to Kale. "Zara says I'm finally fighting on instinct instead of thought." "You're doing more than that." Cain moved to stand beside her, his reflection rippling in the spring's surface. "You're becoming what you were always meant to be." Elara finally looked at him. 3 months of proximity had made his scarred face familiar, even dear. She knew now how he'd gotten those scars, not just from the assassination attempt, but from the weeks afterward, when he'd crawled through enemy territory with half his face torn off, surviving on sheer will and desperate hope. She knew how he'd been before the betrayal, too. Kind, Helena had told her. Hopeful. The sort of alpha who remembered every pack member's name, who played with children in the square, who believed in the fundamental goodness of wolves. Kale had killed that man when he'd ordered his brother's death. What remained was harder, colder, forged in a decade of survival and rage. But sometimes, in quiet moments like this one, Elara caught glimpses of who Cain had been. Gentle humor in his silver eyes. A protective instinct that went beyond strategy and into something more personal. She'd stopped pretending she didn't feel the pull between them. "I received word from our contact in Blackwood," Cain said, and his voice shifted from soft to serious. "There's been a development." Elara straightened. "Kale?" "Growing worse." Cain's jaw tightened. 3 more executions this week. Pack members accused of treason with no evidence, no trial. He's becoming paranoid, erratic. His wolf is destabilizing. "The mate bond," Elara said quietly. She'd felt it herself. The thread that connected her to Kale had grown so thin it was barely perceptible. But she hadn't realized what that weakening might do to him. "Even an unloved bond provides an anchor," Cain confirmed. "Without it, an alpha's wolf can lose its grounding." Kale was never particularly stable to begin with, his ambition always bordered on obsession. Now, without you there to balance him, even unconsciously. He shook his head. He's unraveling. Part of Alara. The old part, the gentle Omega who had spent 3 years trying to be a good mate, felt a flicker of guilt. But it was quickly consumed by the fierce satisfaction of her wolf. Let him suffer. Let him feel a fraction of what he put us through. And Serena, she asked. How is she handling his deterioration? Something shifted in Kane's expression. That's the other development. Sit down. You'll want to hear this. Alara's stomach tightened with sudden dread. She lowered herself to a stone bench near the spring, her hand automatically going to her belly. The baby kicked in response, strong, healthy, growing more powerful by the day. Kane sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Our contact managed to get close to Serena's personal quarters. She's been very careful, very secretive, but servants talk. He paused. She's not pregnant, Alara. The words didn't make sense at first. What? The pregnancy she announced after your funeral. It's fake. Padding beneath her clothes, glamour spells to simulate the appearance of a growing belly. She's been maintaining the illusion for months. Alara's mind reeled. She'd assumed, everyone had assumed, that Serena was carrying Kale's heir. That was why she'd been so bold in claiming her place at his side. That was why she'd been willing to murder Alara. She was securing her position with a child. But there was no child. Why? Alara breathed. What could she possibly gain by faking a pregnancy? Time, Kane said. According to what our contact discovered, Serena has been searching for something specific. Ancient texts, forbidden rituals. She's consulted with every dark witch and rogue healer who would see her. His voice dropped. She's looking for a way to break your mate bond with Kale completely. Not let it fade naturally, sever it. So she can claim it for herself. The implications hit Alara like a physical blow. Mate bonds couldn't be transferred. It was one of the fundamental laws of their kind, a bond formed between two wolves, blessed by the moon goddess, and it ended only in death. Unless. The dark arts, she whispered. She's trying to use dark magic to steal the bond. That's what we believe. If she can find a ritual that severs your connection to Kale completely, she could potentially use the same magic to forge a new bond between herself and him. It would be artificial, corrupted, but it might be enough to legitimize her position. And she's buying time with the fake pregnancy. Making everyone believe she's already carrying his heir while she searches for a way to make their bond real. Alara's hands clenched into fists. That's why she hasn't pushed for an official mating ceremony. She's waiting until she can bond with him properly. Exactly. Alara closed her eyes, processing. Serena's plan was audacious, even by her standards. Fake a pregnancy, murder the true Luna, search for forbidden magic to steal a mate bond. It was the kind of scheme that would have seemed impossibly convoluted 3 months ago. But now, knowing her sister as she truly was, it made perfect sense. Serena had always wanted everything. And she was willing to burn the world to get it. There's more, Kane said, and his voice was gentler now, almost reluctant. Alara opened her eyes. Tell me. The paranoia Kale has been showing. The executions, the accusations of betrayal. Kane paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. It's not just the weakening mate bond. Our contact reports that Serena has been feeding him specific information. Lies designed to make him doubt everyone around him. And there's one lie in particular that seems to have affected him most deeply. What lie? Kane's silver eyes held hers with something that might have been compassion. She found your pregnancy diary. The one you kept in your private chambers, recording every symptom, every hope, every moment of joy about the baby you were carrying. Alara's breath caught. She'd forgotten about that diary. She'd started it the day she discovered her pregnancy, wanting to document everything for the child who would someday read it. She'd hidden it in a secret compartment of her writing desk, never imagining anyone would find it. Serena showed it to Kale, Kane continued. But she didn't show him what you wrote. She told him the diary was evidence of an affair. That you were pregnant with another man's child. That you had betrayed him and the pack. The words fell into silence like stones into still water. Elara sat perfectly motionless, her mind struggling to comprehend. Cale thought she had been unfaithful. Cale thought the baby she carried, his baby, conceived in cold duty but still his flesh and blood, belonged to another man. That's why he allowed the assassination, she said slowly. Not just because Serena seduced him. Not just because he was tired of his quiet Omega Luna. Her voice cracked. He thought I had betrayed him. He thought our child wasn't his. Yes. It shouldn't have hurt. Cale had never loved her, never wanted her, never treated her as anything more than a political obligation. But somehow, this was worse than all of it. He had believed her capable of betrayal. Had believed she would dishonor her vows, her pact, her bond. Had sentenced her to death based on nothing but her sister's lies. And he hadn't even asked her. Hadn't confronted her, demanded the truth, given her a chance to defend herself. He had simply decided she was guilty and arranged her murder. Elara. Kane's hand covered hers, warm and steady. Are you all right? No, she said honestly. But I will be. She let herself feel it for one moment, the grief, the rage, the bitter injustice of it all. Then she packed it away in the cold, hard place where she kept everything else Cale and Serena had done to her. She would use it. When the time came, she would let it fuel her. But not now. Now, there was work to do. The blood moon is in 3 days, she said, straightening her spine. Is everything ready? Kane studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. The ceremony begins at midnight. Cale must stand with his Luna, or whoever he claims as his Luna, in the sacred chamber to complete the ritual. Our plan is for you to infiltrate the palace during the gathering, make your way to the sacred chamber using the old servant passages, and confront him before the allied alphas during the most sacred moment of the ceremony. And you? I'll be positioning our forces in the forest surrounding Blackwood. If things go wrong, we'll be ready to fight. But ideally, Cale's exposure will be so complete that the allied packs will turn on him without any blood being shed. Elara nodded. It was a good plan. Dangerous, complicated, with 100 ways it could go wrong, but good. And she was ready. She had been ready for weeks. The night before the blood moon, Elara stood at the entrance to her chamber in the sanctuary and looked at the small bundle of possessions she was leaving behind. A few changes of clothes. A book of poetry Helena had given her. A carved wooden wolf that Tomas, one of the orphaned pups, had somehow sent her through Kane's network of contacts. She picked up the wooden wolf and pressed it to her lips. I'm coming back for you, she promised silently. All of you. I'm going to make a world where the forgotten are remembered and the overlooked are seen. You should try to sleep. Kane stood in the doorway, his scarred face half shadowed by the dim candlelight. He'd been doing that more often lately, appearing at the edges of her space, watching her with those unreadable silver eyes. I can't, she admitted. Every time I close my eyes, I see their faces. Cale's. Serena's. My mother's. Revenge is a cold bedmate. Is that experience talking? Kane moved into the room, closing the door quietly behind him. 10 years of it. There were nights I lay awake until dawn, planning what I would say when I finally faced my brother again. Imagining how he would look when he realized I was alive. Rehearsing every word of his downfall. Did it help? No. He stopped a few feet away from her, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. Nothing helped. Not until you. Elara's breath caught. Kane. I'm not saying this to complicate things. I know you're still technically bonded. I know we have a battle to fight and a tyrant to overthrow and 100 reasons why this conversation should wait. He moved closer, and she could feel the warmth of him, the steady pulse of his presence that had become as necessary to her as breathing. But if something happens tomorrow? If we don't get another chance? Nothing's going to happen. You can't know that. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. You're about to walk into a palace full of people who tried to kill you. Who still want you dead. And I need you to know. Kane. She covered his hand with her own. I know. The bond with Kale was a thread so thin she could barely feel it anymore. But the connection with Kane. This fragile, growing thing that had bloomed through shared trauma and late-night conversations and the slow revelation of who they truly were, that felt more real than anything she'd experienced in years. She couldn't act on it. Not yet. Not while she was still technically mated to another man, not while she was pregnant with that man's child, not while everything was so complicated and dangerous and uncertain. But she could acknowledge it. She could let him see that she felt it too. After, she said softly. When this is over. When Kale has fallen and Serena has paid and we can finally breathe. Then we'll talk about this. Kane's silver eyes searched her face. Then he nodded, slowly, and pressed a kiss to her forehead that felt like a promise. After, he agreed. She entered the palace through the old servant passages at dusk on the night of the blood moon. The passages were exactly as she remembered, narrow, dark, smelling of dust and ancient stone. She discovered them during her second year as Luna, exploring the palace out of boredom while Kale ignored her existence. They connected every major room in the building, allowing servants to move unseen. Elara had used them to visit the kitchens without ceremony, to bring treats to the orphaned pups without the council's disapproval. Now she used them to return from the dead. She was dressed simply. Dark clothes that hid her pregnant belly as much as possible, her hair bound back, her silver crescent scar covered by a high collar. She'd left her new powers deliberately unleashed, ready to use if necessary. But she hoped she wouldn't need them. Not yet. The sacred chamber was at the heart of the palace, deep underground, accessible only through a single passage that wound through the oldest parts of the building. Elara made her way there slowly, pausing at every corner, listening for guards or servants or any sign that her presence had been detected. She was nearly to the final corridor when she heard footsteps. Elara pressed herself into a shadowed alcove, her heart pounding. The footsteps grew closer, light, quick, the rhythm of someone who knew these passages well. She held her breath, preparing to fight or flee. And Mira rounded the corner. For a frozen moment, they stared at each other. Myra's face was thinner than Elara remembered, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion and grief. She carried a bundle of linens in her arms, clearly on some household errand. Those linens fell to the floor as Myra's eyes went wide. No, she whispered. No, it's not possible. Elara stepped out of the shadows. Mira. Her former handmaiden's legs gave out. She crumpled to the stone floor, and Elara lunged forward to catch her, easing her down gently. Mira was shaking, her hands coming up to touch Elara's face, her shoulders, her arms, as if trying to confirm she was real. You're dead, Mira gasped. I watched them bury you. I put flowers on your grave every day. You're dead, this isn't. I'm alive. Elara grasped Myra's trembling hands. The attack in the forest. They thought they killed me, but I survived. I've been in hiding, recovering, preparing. Tears were streaming down Myra's face now. I mourned you. Every day since you died, her voice broke. Lady Elara. Luna. You're alive. The raw joy in Myra's voice cracked something open in Elara's chest. Here was genuine love, genuine grief, genuine relief. Here was proof that someone, at least one person in this cruel palace, had truly cared whether she lived or died. I need your help, Elara said urgently. I need to get to the sacred chamber before the ceremony begins. Can you help me? Myra's tearful expression shifted to determination. Yes. Anything. But Luna, you should know, she hesitated, fear flickering in her eyes. Things have changed since you died. Lady Serena has taken your place. And she's told everyone that I was carrying another man's child. Ilara's voice was flat. I know. It's not true. I never believed it, not for a second. You would never. I know. Ilara squeezed Myra's hands. But Kale believes it. That's why he let them kill me. Myra's face went white. The Alpha King, he knew. He ordered it. He allowed it. There's a difference, but not much of one. Ilara helped Mira to her feet. I'm going to expose them tonight. All of them. Kale's crimes, Serena's lies, everything. But I need to reach the sacred chamber before the ceremony begins. The servant passages. I'll take you. Myra's voice was steady now, her tears drying as purpose replaced shock. There's a route that bypasses all the main corridors. I've been using it to avoid Lady Serena's spies. Her jaw tightened with unexpected steel. She has eyes everywhere. Anyone who questions her disappears. Ilara's wolf growled with rage. Serena had been busy in her absence, not just seducing Kale and faking a pregnancy, but consolidating power, eliminating threats, building a network of fear and silence. It ended tonight. Take me there, Ilara said. And Mira, whatever happens in that chamber, I need you to survive it. Get the other servants to safety if you can. Find the orphaned pups and protect them. Can you do that? Mira nodded, her small face set with determination. I'll keep them safe, Luna. I promise. Luna. The word hit differently now than it had before. Not a title she'd never earned, a role she'd never filled. Now it felt like armor, like purpose, like the name of the woman she had become. Ilara Grey, the quiet Omega who had never been enough, was truly dead. In her place stood a silver Luna, forged in silver and fire, ready to claim the justice she was owed. Let's go, she said. And together, they moved deeper into the palace, toward the sacred chamber where everything would finally end, or finally begin. Chapter 5. The sacred chamber blazed with the light of 1,000 candles. Ilara pressed herself against the cold stone of the hidden passage, watching through a narrow gap as the most powerful wolves in 5 territories gathered for the blood moon ceremony. The chamber was ancient, carved from living rock centuries ago, its walls etched with symbols of the moon goddess that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. At its center stood a raised dais of white marble, and upon that dais, bathed in the crimson glow of the blood moon streaming through a crystal skylight, stood Kale. He looked different than she remembered. Harder. Wilder. His golden hair hung loose around his shoulders instead of in its usual careful arrangement, and his eyes, those cold, beautiful eyes that had looked through her for 3 years, held a feverish gleam that spoke of a wolf barely contained. The mate bond between them, thin as spider silk, vibrated with his instability. Beside him stood Serena. Her sister was dressed in ceremonial white, a mockery of the gown Ilara had worn at her own mating ceremony. Her golden hair was woven with moonflowers, the same flowers Ilara had been gathering when she was attacked, and her belly swelled beneath the fabric in a convincing imitation of pregnancy. Padding and spells, Ilara reminded herself. Lies upon lies upon lies. The allied alphas stood in a semicircle before the dais. Alpha Marcus of Silver Creek, gray-haired and stern. Alpha Elena of Moonhaven, sharp-eyed and calculating. Alpha Theron of the Northern Territories, massive and imposing. Alpha Darius of the Eastern Mountains, young and ambitious. And Alpha Vera of the Coastal Packs, ancient and wise, her white hair gleaming in the candlelight. 5 alphas. 5 packs. Thousands of wolves whose fates would be decided in this chamber tonight. Kale raised his hands, and silence fell. Brothers and sisters of the Alliance, he began, his voice carrying that false warmth Ilara knew so well. We gather tonight under the blood moon to seek the blessing of the moon goddess. As you know, my beloved maid Alara was taken from me 6 months ago, murdered by rogues who have since been brought to justice. A murmur of sympathy rippled through the crowd. Alara's hands clenched into fists. In my grief, I have found solace in an unexpected place. Kale turned to Serena, extending his hand. She took it with a demure smile, her free hand resting on her fake belly. Lady Serena Grey has been my comfort, my strength, my reason to continue. And tonight, with your blessing, I claim her as my new Luna. The allied alphas exchanged glances. Alpha Elena's eyes narrowed slightly. She had always been perceptive, but none of them spoke. The ceremony was proceeding as tradition demanded. Does any wolf present challenge this claiming? Kale asked, his voice ringing through the chamber. Speak now, or forever hold your peace. Silence. A heartbeat. 2. Alara stepped out of the shadows. I challenge. The words fell into the sacred chamber like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through every wolf present. Heads turned. Gasps echoed off ancient walls. And at the center of it all, Kale's face went pale as milk. No, he breathed. That's impossible. You're dead. Clearly not. Alara walked forward, her head high, her silver-scarred heart pounding with fierce triumph. Every eye in the chamber was fixed on her living face, her pregnant belly, the power that radiated from her like heat from a flame. Though not for lack of trying on your part. Serena's carefully constructed composure cracked. Guards, she shrieked. Seize her. She's an imposter, a witch, some kind of trick. I am Alara Grey. Her voice rang with the authority of a silver Luna, and every wolf in the chamber flinched. Mate of Alpha King Kale Blackwood by the laws of our kind. Luna of the Blackwood Pack by right of bond and blood. And the mother of his true heir. She placed her hand on her belly, where her daughter kicked in response to her mother's racing heart. The gesture drew every eye, and she saw the realization dawn on the allied alphas' faces as they compared her obvious pregnancy to Serena's careful patting. You claim to carry Kale's heir, Alara continued, turning her silver-touched gaze on her sister. But we both know that belly is nothing but cloth and spells. Strip her, if you doubt me. Let the pack healers examine her. There is no child. Lies. Serena's voice was shrill now, desperate. She's lying. She was carrying another man's bastard, that's why she stopped abruptly, realizing her mistake. That's why you what? Alpha Elena stepped forward, her sharp eyes moving between the sisters. Finish that sentence, Lady Serena. She meant nothing by it, Kale interjected, finally finding his voice. His composure was returning, his politician's mask sliding back into place. Alara, I don't know how you survived or what deception you've constructed, but this is neither the time nor place. When is the time and place for justice? Alara demanded. When you've finished executing innocent pack members on false charges of treason? When you've completed your transformation from cold king to mad tyrant? She turned to the allied alphas. 6 months ago, soldiers wearing rogue disguises ambushed me in the Thornwood Forest. They injected me with liquid silver and threw me into a ravine to die. But they weren't rogues. They were Blackwood soldiers, acting on orders from within this palace. A murmur of horror swept through the chamber. I have proof, Alara continued. Insignias recovered from the bodies. Testimony from witnesses. Evidence that this assassination was planned for months, preceded by a campaign of slow poisoning meant to weaken my wolf and make me vulnerable. Poisoning? Alpha Marcus's voice was sharp. What manner of poisoning? Wolfsbane, administered in small doses over many months. My sister, she spat the word, was the one who served me tea every morning. Who sat with me at every meal. Who had access to everything I ate and drank. All eyes turned to Serena, whose beautiful face had gone gray with fear. And the motive? Alpha Vera asked quietly. Ambition. My sister wanted my mate, my position, my life. So she took them. Ilara's voice broke slightly on the last words, but she forced herself to continue. With Kale's knowledge and consent. I did not consent to your murder. Kale's composure finally cracked, rage twisting his handsome features. I was told you had betrayed me. That the child you carried was another man's. That you had dishonored our bond. And you believed it? Ilara laughed, and the sound was bitter as ash. Without asking me? Without demanding proof? You sentenced me to death based on nothing but my sister's lies, because it was convenient. Because you wanted her and not me. Because it was easier to believe I had betrayed you than to admit you had never wanted me at all. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Serena moved. She lunged at Ilara with a shriek of pure hatred, her hands curved into claws, her pretty face contorted into something monstrous. But before she could take more than a step, Ilara's power surged. Her eyes blazed silver, not gold, not the amber of a normal wolf, but pure moonlight silver that seemed to illuminate the entire chamber. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of command that no wolf could resist. Kneel. Serena's legs buckled. She crashed to the marble floor, her body bowing against her will, her face pressed to the cold stone at Ilara's feet. She struggled, screaming curses, but she could not rise. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Even the allied alphas took involuntary steps backward, their wolves recognizing something ancient and terrible in Ilara's power. What are you? Alpha Theron breathed. A silver Luna. The voice came from the shadows behind the dais, and Ilara's heart leaped as Cain stepped into the light. His scarred face was set with grim determination, his silver eyes blazing to match her own. Born once in a millennium. Forged in the silver that should have killed her. Kale's reaction was immediate and violent. You. He stumbled backward, nearly falling from the dais. You're dead. I watched you die. You watched your assassins fail. Cain's voice was cold as winter ice. I survived, brother. I've spent 10 years gathering evidence of your crimes. Murders. Corruptions. Betrayals. You killed our father. You tried to kill me. And now you've tried to kill your own mate and unborn child. The allied alphas were staring at Cain with shock and dawning recognition. Alpha Vera, old enough to remember the young prince who had been beloved by all, stepped forward with trembling hands. Cain Blackwood, she whispered. The firstborn son. The true heir. The true Alpha King. Cain moved to stand beside Ilara, his presence solid and reassuring. I am not here to shed blood, though Moon Goddess knows I've dreamed of it. I am here to expose my brother's crimes and let the allied packs judge his worthiness to rule. You have no right. Kale's voice cracked with desperation. You abdicated when you disappeared. The throne is mine. The throne was stolen. Cain's voice carried absolute certainty. And stolen power corrupts. Look at yourself, brother. You're executing loyal pack members on suspicion alone. Your wolf is destabilizing without the mate bond you tried to sever through murder. You become the very monster you once accused our father of being. The allied alphas were conferring in urgent whispers. Ilara watched them, reading the conflict on their faces, loyalty and fear warring with honor and self-preservation. Finally, Alpha Elena spoke. The evidence is compelling. If what Prince Cain claims is true, it's true. Alpha Vera's voice was weary but certain. I remember the night of that battle. I remember how convenient it seemed that both the old Alpha and his heir died within hours of each other. I had my suspicions then, but no proof. Suspicions are not convictions, Alpha Darius interjected. He was the youngest of the allied alphas, and his eyes kept darting to Kale with something that looked like fear. We cannot simply overturn a decade of rule based on the testimony of a scarred pretender and a vengeful woman. A vengeful woman? Ilara's voice was deadly quiet. I was poisoned for months. Attacked. Left to die in a ravine while my mate rutted with my sister. My vengeance is earned. Even so, Alpha Darius began. I stand with Cain. Alpha Marcus stepped forward, his gray head held high. I knew the old Alpha King. I knew his sons. Cain was the light of that family. Kind, just, beloved by all. If he says his brother murdered their father, I believe him. As do I. Alpha Elena moved to stand beside Marcus. The evidence is damning. The timeline supports his claims. And frankly, her eyes swept dismissively over Cale. Any wolf who would murder his pregnant mate based on nothing but pillow talk is not fit to rule. 2 for Cain. 2 uncertain. Alpha Theron and Alpha Darius exchanged glances. They were the ones with the most to lose. Their territories bordered Blackwood, their economies intertwined with its trade. If they chose wrong, the consequences could be devastating. We need time to consider, Alpha Theron said heavily. This is not a decision to be made in haste. There is no time. Cale's voice was ragged, his eyes wild. They're lying. All of them. This is a coup, a conspiracy, He moved so fast Alara barely saw it. One moment he was standing on the dais, the next he was lunging at her with claws extended, his face twisted into something barely human. His wolf was surging to the surface, unstable and vicious, driven mad by the weakening bond and the crumbling of everything he'd built. But Cain was faster. He intercepted Cale mid-leap, driving his shoulder into his brother's chest and sending them both crashing to the marble floor. They grappled viciously, wolves snarling behind human faces, a decade of hatred finally unleashed. In the chaos, Alara didn't see Serena move. Her sister had recovered from the forced kneeling, Alara's concentration broken by Cale's attack, and she had somehow produced a dagger from the folds of her ceremonial gown. A silver dagger, gleaming with deadly purpose. She aimed for Alara's belly. No. The scream came from the crowd, and Alara barely had time to register the flash of dark hair before someone threw themselves between her and the blade. Her mother. Lady Vera Gray crumpled to the marble floor with Serena's dagger buried in her chest. Time stopped. Serena stood frozen, her hands still extended, her face blank with shock. Alara dropped to her knees beside her mother, pressing her hands to the wound even though she knew, she could feel it through her healing touch. That it was too late. Mother, she whispered. Why? Lady Vera's eyes, the same gray as Alara's own, focused on her daughter's face with difficulty. Blood bubbled at her lips, but she smiled. A terrible, broken smile. I pushed her, she gasped. Serena. I told her she deserved to be Luna. That you were weak. That she should take what should have been hers. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. I made her into this. This monster. My ambition, my hunger for power. Mother. I never told you I loved you. Lady Vera's hand found Alara's, her grip weak but desperate. I should have. Every day. You were always, the better daughter. The better person. I was just too blind, too hungry, to see it. Her breath rattled. Her grip went slack. And Lady Vera Gray died in her daughter's arms, her confession echoing through the silent chamber. Alara knelt there for a long moment, cradling the mother who had never shown her love until the final moment of her life. She felt the tears on her cheeks but didn't wipe them away. Her mother had been complicit in so much pain, so much suffering, but in the end, she had chosen her daughter over her ambition. It wasn't redemption. But it was something. Guards. Her voice was steady despite the tears. Take Lady Serena into custody. She will face trial for attempted murder, conspiracy, and treason. Serena didn't fight as the guards seized her. She seemed broken, staring at their mother's body with an expression that might have been grief or might have been shock. Alara didn't care which. She rose to her feet, her mother's blood staining her hands, and turned to where Cain had finally subdued Kale. The former Alpha King lay pinned to the marble floor, his brother's knee on his chest, his wild eyes darting around the chamber like a trapped animal. Elara walked toward him. The crowd parted before her like water before a ship's bow. Even the allied alphas stepped back, recognizing the power that radiated from her silver-touched form. She stopped at Kale's side and looked down at the man she had called mate for 3 years. "I gave you everything," she said quietly. "My loyalty. My devotion. My body. 3 years of trying to be worthy of a man who never saw me as anything but a political convenience." She shook her head slowly. "I don't hate you, Kale. I'm not sure I ever loved you enough for hatred. But I am done being your Luna." She took a deep breath and spoke the words she had practiced in the quiet hours before dawn. "Before the moon goddess and all gathered witnesses, I, Elara Grey, reject the mate bond between myself and Kale Blackwood. I sever the tie that binds our wolves. I reclaim my heart, my soul, and my future. From this moment forward, we are nothing to each other." The ancient words resonated through the sacred chamber, and Elara felt the mate bond. That thin, cold thread that had connected her to Kale snapped like a severed string. She had expected pain. The breaking of a mate bond was supposed to be agony, a tearing of the soul that left wolves broken and bleeding. She felt nothing but freedom. But Kale screamed. He screamed as if his soul was being ripped from his body, his back arching off the marble floor, his handsome face contorting with unbearable anguish. Cain released him, stepping back with alarm, and they all watched as Kale's wolf surged to the surface in a transformation that was neither controlled nor natural. He shifted, but wrong. His wolf form was twisted, monstrous, a hulking beast of shadow and rage that bore little resemblance to the golden wolf he had once been. His eyes blazed not gold but red, the color of madness, of a wolf that had lost all connection to its humanity. "You've doomed yourself," Kale snarled, his voice barely recognizable. "Without the bond, without the throne, I am nothing. And you have made me nothing." He threw back his massive head and howled, a sound of pure, feral anguish. "But hear me, mate. If I cannot have you, I will destroy everything you build. Everything you love. I will burn your world to ashes and dance in the flames." He turned and crashed through the ceremonial circle, scattering wolves in his wake. Guards tried to intercept him, but his monstrous form tossed them aside like toys. Within seconds, he had disappeared into the darkness beyond the sacred chamber, his howls echoing through the palace halls. "After him!" Alpha Marcus shouted, but Cain held up his hand. "Let him go. Let him go." Alpha Elena stared at him incredulously. "He's mad. Dangerous. He's also alone, without allies, without resources, without a pack." Cain's voice was calm, strategic. "He'll flee into the thornwood. He can't survive there long, not in his current state. And chasing him now will only cost lives." Elara moved to stand beside Cain, her hand finding his without conscious thought. Their fingers intertwined, and she felt something settle into place inside her, not a bond, not yet, but the potential for one. A warmth that had nothing to do with duty or politics or convenience. "He'll come back," she said quietly. "When he's had time to plan. To gather whatever allies he can. He'll come back for revenge. Then we'll be ready." Cain turned to face the allied alphas, his scarred face set with determination. "Brothers and sisters of the Alliance, you've seen the truth tonight. You've witnessed my brother's crimes and his descent into madness. I ask you now, will you accept me as the true Alpha King of Blackwood? Will you honor the alliance my father built?" A long moment of silence. Then Alpha Vera stepped forward, bowing her white head. "I will." Alpha Marcus joined her. "As will I." Alpha Elena inclined her head. "And I." Alpha Theron hesitated, then sighed heavily. "I've made many mistakes in my life. Supporting Kale may have been the worst. I'll make amends now. I stand with you, Cain. All eyes turned to Alpha Darius, the youngest, the most afraid. He looked at Cale's empty place, at Serena's bowed head, at the body of Lady Vera Gray still lying on the marble floor. Then he looked at Alara. At her silver-touched eyes, her pregnant belly, the power that radiated from her like heat from a flame. I stand with the Silver Luna, he said finally. And with her chosen Alpha. It was done. The ceremony continued, though not as anyone had planned. Cain was acclaimed as Alpha King before the allied packs, and Alara stood beside him, not as Luna, not officially, not yet, but as something more. An equal. A partner. A force in her own right. As dawn broke over the Blackwood territory, Alara stood on the palace balcony and looked toward the dark mass of the Thornwood forest. Somewhere in those shadows, Cale was hiding. Plotting. Nursing his wounds and his hatred. Cain came to stand beside her, his hand warm on the small of her back. You should rest, he said. It's been a long night. It's been a long 6 months. She leaned into his touch, allowing herself this small comfort. But you're right. The baby needs rest, even if I don't. The baby. His voice softened. Have you thought about names? Not yet. I wanted to wait until. She trailed off, not sure how to finish. Until it was safe? Until she had a future worth naming her for. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun rise over a changed world. Then Alara turned to face Cain, her silver eyes meeting his. He'll come back, she said again. Cale. He'll rebuild, find allies, plan his revenge. He won't rest until he's destroyed everything we're building. I know. And when he does? Cain's scarred face softened into something that might have been a smile. When he does, we'll be ready. You, me, and the most powerful wolf ever born. Alara placed her hand on her belly, feeling her daughter kick in response. A child of 2 bloodlines, Cale's royal blood and Alara's silver-touched power. A child who would grow up loved, protected, trained. A child who would know her worth from her first breath. Let him run, Alara said, her voice carrying across the dawn. Let him hide. Let him scheme and plot and dream of revenge. She turned her silver gaze toward the dark forest, where somewhere in the shadows, her former mate was nursing his hatred. When my daughter is born, she said, we'll hunt him together. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe, like and share this video to continue listening to this type of story daily and also, to appreciate this community too. I would like to hear your wonderful opinion about this story. Please comment below.